Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Not yet.
That went very smoothly. You're waiting for another slide to come up?
Yes. How about now?
It's there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. This is the KAKT American Knowledge Team meeting on it's one of the most important meetings because it follows the most important meeting on Thursday, the Knowledge Seekers Workshops, followed up with the very powerful Brazilian team meeting. And so we get a chance to bring some representatives from the different continents together on this American Knowledge Team meeting, and understand that we're representing more than just North America here. So thank you all for attending. And I hope you enjoy the trip, because this is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We're discussing intermediate transmutation. And the point of the discussion today is registration. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is already November the 3rd of 2024. And this is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So as we continue with the intermediate transmutation, we're talking about the y-axis sphere and how we are changing the mathematics, and which is a fictitious word. And today we're discussing another word that has an enormous number of meanings, and it's quite shocking. And I do mean shocking, because we're trying to get off the hesitancy highway. And of course, that's the lowest energy state. And so, many of us are like donkeys crossing this bonding highway. And it is a bonding highway because, it's a very slow process. And maybe we are going to need 2 tenths for the evening, as we say, because we are the masters of the universe. That's what we think we are. But what do you mean it doesn't compute? Have you ever heard that before? I have, too many times. And so that is a reference to computers, obviously. And we find that one of the first meanings of a register is a type of computer memory. And it's built directly into the processor of a CPU, the central processing unit of a computer, that is used to store and manipulate data during the execution of instructions. A register may hold an instruction, a storage address, or any kind of data, such as a bit sequence or individual characters. And so that's one of the understandings of computers. So as we are searching for outer space, we want to register our place to get onto the plasma highway to our little pie in the sky. And that is a lifelong ambition. And we question, why is that the lifelong ambition? What about the rest of the pie? And why can't we have that? Would we be too greedy to have that? We don't want to be too greedy, do we? Well, we're not too greedy with respect to the universe, but we sure are greedy with respect to the planet. And so in the books of Maranteva called Kesh, we start with book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And so this becomes very important for us in our greedy ways, because we want to bring the matter, antimatter, and the dark matter together to create this matter. And then we wonder, well, where did that come from? And if we wonder where it came from, we also have to wonder where it goes to. So in book number 2, we have the structure of the light. So this is a means of communicating between matters. Well, that's a pretty good thing. But, when we look at book number 3 and we talk about the origin of the universe, we wonder how these different matters are actually created. And we see the relationship between man's universe and a sister universe. And so this becomes an important part of the understanding of the plasma science, what we call the plasma matter. But it is more than that. And that reason for that is because we are part of that matter. And what we've been trying for 350 weeks in a row at the One Planet, One Nation, One Race for Justice and World Peace is brought to you by Rick Crammon and the members of the Universal Council. And our members of the Universal Council are on planet Earth. But we're starting to realize that there are other members of the Universal Council. It's just we can't see them. And we can't see a lot of things. So for instance, we've only seen the 10 commandments, but now we see that there are missing commandments. So it takes it up to about 24 commandments. And so this puts a lot more pressure on us, because more commandments mean more responsibility. And so this is our ticket to the plasma highway. Well, that's fine, except that we're all still on the transmission highway. And the transmission highway involves a frequency. And we want to get into the transition highway. And we wonder, this transition highway, it's kind of at the crossroads. And with these crossroads, it means that there are more than 2 possibilities. But, we don't want to complicate things, because we just want to go from the transmission highway to the transmutation highway. And that's kind of what we're discussing right now. And so we're bringing the crossroads together of the X and the Y axis, because, we have our little pie chart, and we see that from our science, the speed of light is a constant transmission, but it has a variable transition. And so is that speed of light just that part of the pie? That part of the pie that we are seeing, and sometimes it's a delicious pie, and other times it's a horrible pie. And then the rest of the universe, well, based on light, it's light years away. So we wonder if our pursuit of this little piece of the MAGRAPH pie is disconnecting us, or is a conflict in a zone between affinity and prejudice. And so what does that mean? That means we have to make relationship choices. And so we find the 3 dimensions of transmission, the X, Y, and Z axis. And if we want to elevate to another relationship of transmission, we have to go through a transition. And we also have to have three dimensions, the X, Y, and Z axis. And so from that point of view, it's a viewpoint of singularity. And so here we are converging the X and Y axis into a transmutation, which takes us to a new transmission dimension. And all we're discussing is the medium. We're just not understanding where this message comes from. And so when we look at the word register and we look at the root of the register and its derivatives, it's the Anglo-French register, a name for a book in which day-to-day affairs are recorded. That's what we all think it is, isn't it? Because it's rooted in medieval Latinum, registrum, or an alteration of late Latin regista, meaning things recorded or records. And some of us have even made a reference to Akashic records. And so there are written records and there are Akashic records. And so when we talk about a register, it's a book or a record containing usually an official list of names, items, etc., such as a central national register. And then we think nothing of it. So to enter into a register, this is called registration. So that refers to the act of recording an event, a transaction, a name or other information, or an aggregation of stored data, such as in a computer. But this data can be usually containing past events, transactions, names, or other information. And so alternatively, the term can denote a record of all charges to a debit account. Well, so far, so good. And then, of course, another meaning of register refers to music. So, such as the height or range of a note, set of pitches, or pitch classes, a melody, part instrument, or a group of instruments. So, in other words, the higher register indicates higher pitch. For example, violins are in a higher register than cellos. So, most of us understand music. And if we can't play an instrument, well, maybe we look at the vocal register. So these registers include the modal voice or normal voice, a vocal fry, a falsetto, and the whistle register. Registers originate in the laryngeal function. And they occur because the vocal folds are capable of producing several different vibratory patterns. So each of us has a very distinct vocal register. But there has to be some kind of formality, some kind of convention. So we're looking at academic registers. These are the language conventions. We use it for writing and speaking. And of course, the most important is in professional academic contexts. And so we've heard Mr. Kesh many times say, how important the words are and how important it is in the translation because the meaning is lost in the translation. So by being aware of conventions, it makes it easier to follow such context. And so we understand why it's written the way it is. Knowing the expectations also gives us the option of joining the conversation. So this is where we have the difference between the academic registers and, say, social discourse, the conventions of our day-to-day dialogue. totally different, carries different meanings for different words. And this is where we get into trouble, when we don't understand the meaning. And then, of course, we have registered peer review. This is done by registered professional scientists. And these are professional scientists because they're recognized for their competence, their ability, and integrity in serving the public interest. Oh, yeah. And they are committed to keeping their skills and knowledge up to date through continuing professional development, known as CPD. And so, you, as knowledge seekers who are dedicating yourselves to coming to these classes on a regular basis, whether it's the Knowledge Seekers Workshop or the American Knowledge Team meeting or the Brazilian team, you are all professional scientists because you're all enhancing your knowledge skills. And you don't need peer review to understand that. What you need to understand is that there are feeding dimensions and feedback dimensions. And so this is where the confusion lies, because 1 and 1 is more than 2. That's not what we were taught in school. And when we take a 1 and we take another 1, we just assume that those are the same 1, which they cannot be in science. So they're just A1, and the other one is another A1. And the 2 together add up to something that is more than the combination of the 2. And of course, you don't lose them, because in order to maintain the 2, you still have to keep the 1 and the 1. So you have actually 3 feedback dimensions, the original 1 plus 1 and the feedback of the greater than 2. And so we are none of these dimensions, and we are just the observer fudger as we try and round things off as we enter into the volume of spheres and the surface of spheres, understanding the surface to volume ratios. So we have to have this academic notation of being able to pilot higher and deeper. And so we see these relationships that we try and achieve a balance. So in the plasma science, it's a magnetical gravitational balance, which we call a MAGRAV. But in the scientific community and how they relate, the conservation of magnetic fields versus the conservation of energy, the only criteria is in the physical dimension. And so the other dimensions are referred to by the spiritual scientists, where they introduce the spirit and the soul and try and make sense of that. And so we find that the 2 coexist, but not together, individually and separately. One doesn't register with the other. And so this is where the plasma science comes in, because it brings these 2 in balance and adds to that knowledge. And this is what we have to understand, the positioning of the plasma science. So when we look at the conservation of susceptibility, one thing we do understand is that we are all variable, right? We are all the product of susceptibility, and we're all independent, and we're all plasmatic, which makes us independent plasmatic variables. But that variability is variable, and what constitutes that is a changing in the relationship of the magnetic and gravitational force fields. And in order to maintain that balance, there has to be a gravitational balance, but that is comprised also of a magnetical gravitational balance of a force field. And so on the one side, we have a magnetical susceptibility. On the other side, we have a gravitational susceptibility. And so this is the difference between singularity versus duality. When we talk about the basic registration, we're just looking at the singularity. But when we look at the registration of the universe, we have to look at the duality. But there's a problem with the duality is we can't see it. And we know this because when we made the cups of life, we set up a pattern and we achieved a Gans. Where did that come from? It wasn't there when we started. It was a product different from what we started with. We started with a metal and then a nano-coated process of the copper. And not only did we create a Gans, but we created two cups that reflected the emotional strength. And when we say emotional strength, so when we're talking about the cups of man, is the bringing together of these two emotional strengths. So one is the emotional first cup, and two is the physical second cup. And the two together are representative of the cup of man. And that's who we are. We are man. We're made up of emotions and physicality. And then we're able to create other cups of Gans, such as the CO2 and the calcium, the zinc and the copper. And strangely enough, water and amino acid. And then we added some other Gans radiance manifestations, such as gold Gans and special exotic Ganses yet to be identified. And of course, there are many more Ganses that we haven't been able to do on a personal basis, but our labs sure have. And so we look at the variety of Earth Ganses and we start to see, well, there's more. And not only in the foreground, but in the background. And how many more are there? And we always said, well, 1 and 1 is more than 2. Well, obviously, it's more than that. And so we create this periodic table. And in our trying to get the details of our Earth space range, we have to be a little bit prejudiced so that we can get what we want to get. And so we know that the Earth space can achieve all the elements on the periodic table of elements. And so if we are looking to achieve this, then we know that that is possible because the Earth has done it. So we just may be ignorant of how this is done. And so we are locked up in our matter plasma dimension. And we're just coming to realize that we have a physical dimension. That's easy because we can touch it and see it. But we also have a plasmatic dimension. We can't touch it or see it. But this is still part of our matter plasma because there's a direct correlation. And as a result of that direct correlation, and we could say that we are affected by our physicality, but we're also affected by our emotional state. And clearly, our emotional state, we can't touch it or see it. And so we find ourselves being feedback dominant from this matter plasma dimension. And as such, it puts limitations on us. But, when we look at the principal matter, the PM ticks, it transcends these limitations. It comes from other places. And these PM ticks are magnetical and they come together with the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter. And they go through a conversion process and creating a plasma gen. But that process is not finished at that point in time because that only creates a maggrav condition in a gravitational state. But that gravitational state is not in a physical state until there's another field interaction, and the product of that we call inertia. And then there's the possibility to manifest in the physicality. So when we're looking at this principle matter interaction, we find that energy is just a pack. It's a pack of energy. And when it comes in a nice parcel. It comes from all directions. It comes in different flavors. And some we absorb, some we interact with, and some we ignore. And so this is the basis of the principal energy flow. We find that energy is in motion. It's always in motion, but it's a two-way street. So there's a two-way transmission and a two-way transition. So we see the energy coming together and creating our blue planet. And the reason it's a blue planet is because we're the water planet. So we emit what we are, and what we are is a manifestation of emotion. And so as the energy comes in, the energy goes out. But something happens in between. And that in-betweenness is our physicality. And so that interaction extends to other bodies. And so we still maintain this two-way transmission and two-way transition. But these bodies both have a two-way emission of intention. And then the bonding connection is a covalent bonding, one to the other and the other to the one, back and forth. This becomes very important to understand because as we're creating our y-axis sphere, we understand that each sphere is a conservation of susceptibility. So this y-axis transmutation can be anywhere along the x-axis relationship. And so that's why there are things that are moving around us. But, there are things moving within us as well. And then, of course, we can do the movement. And so do we understand how these things go around? So what we see is the basic matter state and our understanding of the links, what we call the affirmation of life. But in our ignorance, maybe we are denying life because we don't understand what bonds all of these points together because we can't see it. Each point has a tensity of containment. So that's what constitutes a point. And then each point has a mass relationship. So not all the points are the same. And each point is a registration. And do we know what that registration is? And who did the registering? So we find that these spherical fields are plasma fields. And there are many plasma fields and they overlap. And so when we look at our body, we find that it's a Gans manifestation. And each Gans is a Magrav. And all the Ganses have come together through this covalent bonding. So the fields themselves are the registration books. Each field is a book. And that book is a registration of the energy contained in that book. And as such, it has to maintain its position. But there's a collective registration of all the books. And so these spheres then have the capability of interacting. And so as we said, from a polar point of view, the North Pole connects to the South Pole and the South Pole connects to the North Pole. And so this becomes all part of the Magrav energy transfer state. but this transfer has to be in balance. And so we find that the potential and kinetic energy on one side has to balance with the potential and kinetic energy on the other side. Well, how is that possible? So we see that there has to be a balance of the magnetical gravitational fields on one side, and magnetical gravitational fields on the other side. And if they're different, well, how come they are in balance? And so this becomes the ongoing question, because we're talking about the conservation of the plasma state dependency. So when we're looking at the matter gen, it comes from a two-way street of equality. So the equality means that both sides are equal. But how can that be if they are variable? So we have to take into consideration what we know from the cups of life is that we can create an atomic state from a basic elemental product. We can nanocode it, and then we can create a GAN state. And we find that each state is an elevation by an order of magnitude. And so we could say that, well, one side balances the other side, but does it? Are we certain of that? Or can we just say that, there's 1/10 on one side and there's 1/10 on the other side? We're not exactly sure which state we're talking about, but we are talking about conservation of plasma state dependency and the balance of the magnetical gravitational field forces. And so it's not just horizontal and it's not just vertical. And so as we found out in the physical state that we can break up the pH of water, and so we have a balance between the alkaline and acidic states in the atomic state. Well, we have to understand that we can do the same in the nanostate, in the GAN state, and then, of course, that one step beyond the plasma state. Understand that the plasma state is not just one step beyond, it is one of many steps beyond. So from our point of view, the most important connection, because we're organic beings, is carbon. And so we find in the most stable state, we are in a mass of carbon-12. But then we have isotopes of carbon-10 and carbon-14, which are part of the transition state. And then we have extreme isotopes, carbon-8 and carbon-16. And so as we split up the relationship between the magnetic and gravitational field forces, and as we see with the carbon-12, it's a convergence of two fields. So the carbon-12 product comes from the amalgamation of carbon-24 divided by 2. And so if we go to the intermediate level, carbon-10 and carbon-14, the total of those is 24. So we divide those by 2, we get carbon-12. And if we go to the extreme carbon-8 and carbon-16 and add those together, we get carbon-24. And we look at the average as carbon-12. So we find that that balance remains, even though we have the variables. And then there are these states in between. And when we look at these states in between, does that work? So we look at the carbon-9 and the carbon-15, and that's 24, and we divide that by 2. Yeah, we get carbon-12. And the same with the carbon-11 and carbon-13. Total is carbon-24 divided by 2 is carbon-12. And then we have this other strange thing, CH3, which is carbon-12 and 3 hydrogens. comes up to be carbon-15. So when we put all these together, we see that there's a relationship. One line is even, the next line is odd. The even lines are symmetric. The odd lines are asymmetric. And so this asymmetric relationship becomes a transition state in between the symmetric states. And then we have the capability, obviously, of making compound molecules. And so we introduce other elements in order to be able to achieve these compound molecules. Because when we look at all the ganses, they are all compound molecules. Whether it be CO2 GANs, carbon and oxygen, or whether they be CH3 GANs, which is carbon and hydrogen. And then there are multiples thereof. And so we find that we can add, let's say, carbon-15 and carbon-15, we get carbon-30. And we can add carbon-30, carbon-15, and carbon-15 and get carbon-60. And say, well, wait a second. Carbon-60 seems to be 5 times carbon-12. And that is how we can elevate the strength. It all depends on the relationship. And we have to be in balance. And if we are on one side of the equation, can we stay in balance? Well, yes, of course. Because we're looking at the balance between the mass in the higher energy states and the mass in the lower energy states. And so to assist in that, we have a chemical registration. And this is an essential system to ensure that every compound or molecule you work with is identified in a unique manner. And so this single central source of identity should be used by everyone and by all the other systems, so you never lose track of exactly what compound was tested. And that works really, really well when you're discussing physical products. But it becomes very difficult when you're discussing plasma products. So in terms of physical products, for instance, and when we talk about phosphorylation, what we're looking at is the pole flipping of the points on the hexagonal formation of the glucose molecule, which is part of what we eat. And the phosphorylation process flips the points and creates fructose. Now we all think of fructose as sugar. Understand that CH3 is also sugar. So the question comes is, if through the process of phosphorylation, we create fructose, what happens if we eat fructose? And now we understand the dilemma. The dilemma is quite severe because we have reoriented ourselves. The fructose we produce is the energy that we need. The fructose that we eat is very difficult for us to process. It renders our phosphorylation process as irrelevant, redundant, and so therefore it is no longer a food, but rather a toxicity. So in this process of phosphorylation, we see that there's a transmission of energy, there's a transition of energy, there's a transmutation. And this becomes part of what we need, not only to transition various emotions, but also for transportation, fundamentally, as a walking creature. And so when we look at this phosphorylation process and the flipping, if you will, this flipping has to cross a vanishing point. And this vanishing point is at the point of what we call the blood-brain barrier. And so if we look closely at what happens here, the blood as it courses through the body encapsulates the brain. So in other words, the blood flows around the brain, but the blood flows within the body. And then we find it isn't the right side to the right side correlation, but there's a crossover like this. And so the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. Well, so does the blood. The blood crosses over as well. And at the cross point, well, and there's the heart. And the heart is the emotional grand central station, where the instructions from the brain come and the feedback from the body come. And so the heart has its own language because words don't register, but the emotion does. Well, what about the mind? And so when we look at the soul of the mind, we wonder, are we of two minds? Are we too intense? Or are we in two tents? Maybe in two camps? So we see that there's a crossover. These two minds are encapsulated by the blood circulation. Understand that the blood is an extension of the emotional fields. And then that crossover, which goes from the encirclement of the brain to the interchange within the body. And we have a system of arteries and veins which deliver and retrieve the blood from the extremities and come back. So the blood flows within the body, but the blood flows around the brain. And we wonder, are we really ready for a mind-blowing experience? Well, ready or not, part of the mind is the soul of the man. And the soul of the man is an energy pack, is in an energy state. And the brain is in the physicality. And the brain cannot manifest in the physicality on its own. It has to have a relationship. And that relationship has to be the environment. And in our case, the soul of the earth is that environment. And so the soul of the mind is the amalgamation of the soul of the earth and the soul of the man together. And they function with a language. And that language is an emotion. And so it conveys that by crossing over into the body via the heart. And so within the heart, we have the emotion of the soul of the physicality. And so we find that the heart has two responses because it's a two-way street. One is from the emotion of the brain, and one is the feedback emotion of the physicality. Either way, it's non-tangible. It's non-tangible matter state. So the tangibility of the soul of physicality only comes in when there is a physicality of the earth. It is not possible without the physicality of the earth. So the physicality of man depends on the physicality of earth. And so when we look at scientific registries, scientific registries want to know prospectively the patient and treatment data to enable what they call longitudinal analysis, kind of a fancy word of data processing. But they provide an outstanding databases for health services research. This allows them to enable comparison of methods and scientific support for the introduction of innovative treatment procedures or new healthcare concepts. Where are we going with this? It seems there are many definitions of what a registration is. Shockingly, does register mean to abandon? By law, it means to voluntarily sign over for safekeeping, abandoning complete ownership for partial. Directly speaking, shockingly, the word register means abandon. So when you register your baby, your house or car, you actually abandon it. The government then adopts your child and takes possession of your house and car. And if you ever wondered why you have a birth certificate, is that the verification of validation that you were born? Wouldn't it be easier just to look in the mirror and you see yourself? Do you need a birth certificate to see yourself? And what about a death certificate? Do you need to know when you die? Do you need the confirmation, the verification and validation that you are dead? And who decides? And why is this important? And this is a subject not really to be discussed here. But what we have to understand is that the registration of abandonment is the difference between man-made law versus universal law. And so we question, is the brain ignorant of the registration of the creator? Is that what the creator has done, has abandoned us? Or have we abandoned the creator? And so when we look at the rules of the universe and we see that the universal law is interdependence, and there are many rules, so there's service to others or there's service to self. And of course, there's the golden rule, which is the law of attraction. And then there's the loosh, which is the law of detachment. And of course, there's purpose, isn't there? There's purpose in life. We'll call that the sixth sense. There must be a purpose in life because it isn't just to wash your car. But interestingly, we like to play poker because it tests our skill at lying. But there's no poker playing in outer space because there are no words in outer space. They don't look at what you say because they can't see it, and they don't have the ears to hear it. But what they do see is the truth. And the truth is, in the universal law, there's no killing. This is the law of hurtfulness. And the worst part of killing is there's no suicide because life wishes to live. And so the commandments that we were talking about are really guidelines of ethics and morality. And so when we look at these rules and we talk about Lush, the law of detachment, where we have fear and greed and ego validation, and we leak emotionally, it drains us of energy. And this energy that we're leaking is harvested. We call it Lush harvesting. And it becomes part of the physical feeding system. In order for us to escape this physical feeding system, we have to be detached and at ease. So that we can soar past the ego and be free. The ego is our captive. And we are the captured. And if we want to be free, we cannot be free with the attributes of fear and greed. We have to be free and detached. Because the ego depends on the fear and the greed for the feeding. So we have a choice. And for many, this becomes a point of conflict, but there is a conflict resolution where we can look at this as a point of containment, a point of covalent bonding, bringing of these energies together, because energy binding is very important. It's part of the self-serving process. But not at the expense of others. Because the others are also energy binding in a self-serving manner. So if you steal from them, what are their options? Do they have to go steal from someone else? And so it begins the violation of the laws of conservation, and that's what we're talking about. So when we look at the plasma rules, we find that it's different from the way we do things in Lush harvesting. In plasma harvesting, the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And we can continue to feed it because the binding zone develops intensity. And each binding zone has a mass. And that conflict point is a conflict resolution and a binding zone from two other fields, two other camps, two other tents. And it's these two other points that come together as one, converting to a containment density. And so we live in a world of ignorance, and they say ignorance is bliss. But ignorance also can mean being disrespectful. So, what you're doing and what's going on is no never mind to me, and I can be in a blissful existence. But what you're doing and what you're working at is not respected by me and has no benefit to me. So I don't respect it. And then you become disrespectful. And so that form of ignorance is destructive. And as we all know, you can't insult the ignorant because that's the definition of being ignorant. And they are disrespectful. And maybe they can compute, but they cannot register with the universe. And this is where their problem sits. So they partake in killing because this is a binding energy. It's a usurpation of free will. And they fail to understand that you harm yourself when you harm others because you're binding and stealing the energy from others at their expense. And then, of course, to make matters worse, they promote suicide. This is another form of self-binding, but it's misguided. It's a misguided free will because self-harming is a supreme violation of natural law. So you're really just shifting the problem to another place. And you're playing into the whole mess. And so we see that even a stone has a soul. And we say, well, the stone, the purpose of the stone is an anchorage, it's a commemoration. Perhaps it's a form of idolatry. And so this acknowledgement as a confirmation of where we are on earth is the third rock from the sun. And so the emission of the stone soul is really an emission of declension. But we have to understand that the plasma science is taking us from the bond age of chains to the covalent bonding. So when we talk about the flow of will, we have to compare the registration of limitations. So Goliath intimidates David. Oh, yeah? Well, David intimidates a stone. Oh, yeah? And a stone intimidates Goliath. And so the result is a manifestation of wills. And when we look at the registration of unlimitations, man cannot abandon the soul. So what man can do is go from state to state and one step beyond. And not only the one step beyond in the higher energy state, but one step beyond in the lower energy state. And how is that possible? So we found out in the post-Sanya conference era that it is possible because here we are producing the GANs of gold, for instance. And so to understand the law of conservation, we have to look at path link and susceptibility. So the emission of attention is magnetical, and the emission of retention is gravitational. And so there's an interaction to create the emission of intention. And we have to consider it nearness and proximity because it's the covalent bonding of the fields contained within their tensity and mass. But the law of conservation has to take into consideration the registration of the wishes of the Creator. This is the plasma vision fields. And from those fields, you can go one step beyond in both directions. So when we're looking at the y-axis transmutation dimension, we have to understand that we can transition the various ranges and each transmission elemental stopping point is a pH of the registration. And that transcends the transition transcends the y-axis transmutation dimension. The laws of conservation govern the covalent bonding attributes, and containment requires gravitational tensity and mass. And the soul of the man cannot be abandoned. That's why we're in the post-15th March 15, 2024 era of choices of the new selection process. How we see the Earth space as this bountiful space, and how we see outer space as a transmutation space. And wherever we want to go is that graceful space of our inner space. And so we don't need the gravitational confirmation, but we do need the connection. And we can see that there's a representation in the hydrogen emission spectrum that shows how this gravitational confirmation works. The bringing together of the magnetical field forces of the sun and the magnetical field forces of the earth and the magnetical field forces of the creator, and to come together with the gravitational confirmation on this beautiful planet. And not only for the planet, but for the soul of man. And the combination of that gives us the cornerstones of science, which are manifest in the soul of physicality, and they transcend various energies from the nano to the pico to the gans to the plasma to the soul cornerstones. All of these are channels for the emission of intention, and so they transcend the transmission spectrum. So we have to understand that there's a transition spectrum susceptibility, which goes from the surface superficiality of physicality to the internal substance of the plasma substrate. And so that point of containment is of a plasmatic interaction. But what we're seeing is the manifestation of that interaction, the convergence of that containment, the balance between the gravitational field forces and the magnetical field forces. And so we have one step beyond the point of containment. And then we have one step beyond that as well, in both directions. And that's where the balance comes in. This is the Maghreb state that affects the transmutation transition. And so we see how the blue planet performs and how we perform on the blue planet. So this is the transmutation process, the emission of intention in the micro and the macro. Beyond the Earth space is a universal space, and the ticket is the field strength of the dove, the many points of the pH of peace. And so we begin a new process in the month of November, the transmutation training in the nutrition and wellness sector. So please consider joining. And also understand that we are only at the beginning of the plasma research. This is the new frontier. This is the new future. This is the future of peace and prosperity, not just on Earth, but in the universal context as well. So when we're looking at 562 weeks of the Knowledge Seekers workshops, trying to transcend the limitations of nuclear science and bringing together this greater oneness, this greater relationship, this greater registration of the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science. And there's a World Peace Treaty. We have to sign it. We have to sign it with true intention. But if you're looking at an olive tree that is 3,500 years old, you have to ask yourself, is man the reactor of a three-dimensional transcendent universe? And what exactly gets registered through this field transmutation? Can man go into outer space without a peace dome? And can we transmute through the dimensions of history? 3,500 years is a long time. And so in that time, many combinations exist of the x-axis and y-axis sphere creation. But the one thing remains. Man-made law does not register in the physical transmission dimensions. So plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. That's the end of the lesson, and that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for allowing me to continue.
Thank you, Alex, again for enlightening us into this very deep, vast, never-ending knowledge. I did forget one thing, which was the remind everyone that the Brazilians are having a conference, I think this coming weekend. And I'll just share the screen for a moment on this if I can, and then you take it back, Alex.
Okay.
Okay, so Claudia, would you, if you're here, would you like to say anything? But this is coming up on the 9th and 10th of November, which is this coming weekend, and it's in Rio de Janeiro, I believe, and a 2-day conference. It won't be broadcast, as I understand it, will be recorded. And the KAKT Brazilian team will have a booth, and they'll be reaching many numbers of people that will be going by and sort of seeing this sort of new understanding in health through the fields in so many ways. But Claudia, if you'd like to share anything, please feel free to open your mic. So we elevate their souls and give to them on the soul level, because again, I don't think most of us will be able to travel there, although many of the knowledge seekers from Brazil are. And Claudia, if there's something you'd like to share, I had forgot to bring this background up earlier, but this is what's coming up, and we know the Brazilians have reached many thousands of people, and probably many more thousands we're not even aware of. So we thank the whole team of the Brazilian group for, in a way, enlightening us as well.
Thank you, Mark. We'll be in Rio de Janeiro, like you said, 2 days. And there will be like 4 or 5 knowledge seekers from Brazil and others that I don't know. And there we'll explain what is the KAKT Foundation, what's the science, the plasma science. They will have there the cup of life, number 1, 2, and they will bring there to the 5 cups, like, and you do like 5 minutes, the people that want to stay beside the 5 cups. And
oh, you mean the stacker? Like
yeah, the stacker.
And they'll have 2, so you can go like a twinity system?
Yes. And the people will say like what they felt, and we'll have like a TV too, with many informations, many videos during the day. And but I don't know the English. What Rafael will explain, I think, what's the KAKT Foundation. You not broadcast only on live, but the knowledge seekers that will be there, they will record and you can see after.
Right. Rafael is supposed to
be,
Rafael is going to be talking for an hour, I think, on the first day. probably
Yes,
explaining
yes.
everything, and very beautiful. Yeah, it's great too. And you're getting an award, I understand, some sort of humanitarian award for helping people in the wellness area.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So again, as the Brazilians have uplifted and elevated so many others, even to Mr. Kesh's meeting in London and other places, Manchester and in Sanya, let's do our part and to use our souls to elevate that, because there'll be many, many people passing through. It'll just be a 2-day flow of knowledge, in a way, universal knowledge, coming out of their booth, and what they'll be interacting with the others down there. So this will be something extraordinary, way out of what most people would expect to see, probably, other than the knowledge seekers. But this is the new universal understanding. Any questions? But if you know anyone in Brazil that's in that area, and I think the hotels are a little bit hard to come by. I think somebody was showing that in the Brazilian meeting. They were trying to find ways to book. There must be plenty of B&B or other places to stay if you were there,
Yeah.
yes?
Yes, but I think that the price is a bit expensive now, because
Okay, yep.
we saw that many others expositions will be in the same day, like the BRICS,
Ah,
some of the
okay.
something like that.
So every hotel,
So
most hotels will be taken, so therefore they can charge more
yeah,
because it's a limited supply. Mm. But beautiful work. Again, another outreach to the community, and we thank the whole Brazilian team. I'm sure the national government, with the space program and everything else, some people have to be inquiring, what is this new space technology that the Kesh Foundation is talking about? It's not only the craft, but this other dimension of traveling the universe on the energy level. So hopefully they'll pick up on, I'm sure they're ready to pick up on it, but again, maybe they have a boss or they have other people saying, no, we don't want to touch this right now. But I'm sure they're very, very interested in this new type of space travel without burning fuels. So we just elevate them to, again, continue to progress in their understanding and their sharing. I mean, the government officials there. And I'm sure they'll be observing as well what happens at this booth and so on and so forth. And I think in the future, this will continue to happen. Maybe even Mr. Kesh sending in a vertical or a couple of vertical units to quickly show a transmutation or something else. But we'll have to see. It's beautiful. But we thank them and we elevate all those involved in this process. And we thank the Kesh Foundation for sharing this knowledge. Anything else, Claudia, or anyone else about this? Just another reach out to the community in so many ways. And I think they have a great track record, and there's so many testimonials of people who've discovered by accident sometimes. It's not only for the COVID, as we found out, but they use that cup one and other cups for different reasons and had quite a bit of success. So thank you, Mr. Kesh, and thank the whole Brazilian team, Rafael, and everyone else involved. Okay, Alex, if you want to, I just thought we'd bring that up. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Sure, Mark, I'll take the screen back then and see how this works.
Like a charm.
That was lucky.
Okay, well, thank you, Alex, for the presentation. You didn't mention anything. Well, you did mention about emotions and things like this we'd use in space. But why is Mr. Kesh saying that most creatures in the universe have one eye? Obviously, is he talking about the dimension of physicality or is he talking about the dimension of energy? It just seems that are we going into a universe with cyclopses, or are they seeing through the eye of the soul? Is this what he was referring to? I'm not sure.
A very interesting question, Mark, because I'm not sure either. Uh, you know, here we are all trying to come to grips with the new reality, and then, wondering what would be like if
Yeah.
what would be like if your girlfriend only had one eye, and you know.
Yeah, it would be quite a bit different. But again, they seem to, not all of them, but he said that this double hemispheric brain that we have is not unique, but it's not common in the universe.
Well,
So,
this is the
yeah,
discussion today. Yes, exactly, exactly. And this is what has really pushed me to bring this subject up, because the physicality. Uh, so the question of physicality, there are two aspects of it that I'm particularly concerned about. One is that you have a launch point, a landing point, and so it's a point of physicality. So in our case here, it's Earth, and one of the things that was discussed is that it's much easier for us to travel from Earth to another planet, even beyond our solar system. Okay, well, much easier than what it would be, say, to travel from North America to Europe, for instance. And that seems to be counterintuitive, right? I mean, if you're going to come to grips with a new reality, I would think that, well, tell me if I can move from here to Brazil, or if I can, do that first, and then, well, if I'm successful with doing that, maybe I can move from here to the moon. And if I'm successful with that, well, then maybe I can do something else. So isn't it the same way we learn how to drive a car, right? We want to be able to get out of the parking lot, and then we want to get on the street, and then we want to go to the grocery store, and maybe we want to go on a camping trip. So we extend our range of capabilities. But here in this case, it seems to be opposite. Our range of capabilities extended unconditionally, universally, and the range within this physicality is more difficult. This point that I'm belaboring has a lot to do with the fact that we have always been of the belief that the so-called extraterrestrials are of a higher species. And if we look at the equality and we see that the equality is equal, that there's no such thing as a higher species, there is a more advanced species, but not advanced in terms of equality. And this is proven, if I may just digress to one point. There is no competition between the lungs and the kidneys. Soul of the man provides the energy for both. It cannot say, well, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and we're going to, give energy to the lungs. And, while that process is going on, well, kidneys, you're just going to have to wait and your turn will come in a couple of hours. It really doesn't work that way at all. And if you think in those kind of terms, then you understand how dysfunctional the body could really be. And so we treat the body that way as well. And so our understanding of this has caused all these problems because it's a misunderstanding. So we see that the universal energy is unconditional. We're the ones who are conditional, and this is part of the problem. So how do we take this conditionality off? That's the first thing. So the first thing is we have to understand is that we are as equal as the extraterrestrials. But that brings another point. And we wonder, what is the problem with the extraterrestrials? Did you ever ask, do they have a problem? Or are we just sitting in awe and say, oh my God, they are so much more superior than we are? We're the ones who have all the problems. Well, one of the problems that they have is understanding the physicality. And if that is the case, then the physicality of man is a feature. And it's quite a special feature. And it's a total disrespect of this feature that is causing our problems. And this disrespectfulness comes from the ignorance of understanding that isn't a matter of equality where one is more equal than others, but it is a matter of unconditional giving of the universal creator. And so the physicality of man is one of those gifts. And if we can extend this physicality to go to another planet, if you will, then in that process, the extraterrestrials who seem to be lacking in that capability would also learn from that. And this is actually a wonderful revelation. But there's another point to be made here. If you are traveling, say, from Canada to Florida, let's say, which a lot of snowbirds are getting ready to do, would you do that in just a couple of minutes, or would it take a day or two? And you could say, well, it depends on if you're flying or if you're driving. So the range would be from maybe 1 day by flying or 2 days by driving, and it can be done. But would you do anything in between? Is there a midpoint? Is there a midpoint between your launch point and your landing point? So in order to have a physicality, there has to be a physical destination. But if you're in between two physical destinations, Mark, how can I meet you halfway and maybe we just have a little sit down and enjoy our company, maybe have a space coffee and a space discussion without words, but through emotions. But how can we meet at some nebulous point in the in-between space? How would that be possible?
I don't know if it would be.
Well, I was of that opinion, and
But
now
yeah.
my opinion has changed. So what do you think?
Well, Mr. Kesh indicated that they suffer the same sort of problems with the physicality as the man, the same sort of conditions as the man does, the ones that are in the physicality. So, and also he said we're both in the same position at one point where he said they're trying to get back to the mother too. They're trying to get back to their soul, but they don't apparently know how to. So they're suffering from the same conditions as the man, and they're also trying to get back to the mother, trying to discover the soul. So I don't know if you could meet in the in-between point at this point. until they probably want to make themselves available to these systems as well that are here. I don't, maybe this is another one of the reasons they would be coming here to correct some of the conditions or the imbalances in their structure. It would seem to me, at least the ones who move in the dimension of physicality. As he said, the spacecraft were so enamored with them, but he said it's nothing more than magnetical gravitational positioning reactors. Maybe a little fancier than we've seen, but basically matter state reactors. So,
Right.
yeah.
But you know, they are also tourists, just like us. You know, we have tourists on this planet. Why can't we have tourists in the universe? And would we be the only tourists? Why can't?
No, no. He said this would be one of the biggest future industries would be tourism into the universe from this planet. This is what would be one of the bigger industries coming up in the future, travel excursions into the universe. Oh, you think I'm joking?
No, I'm thinking of the concept. You know, it would be you know you'd
Yeah,
get for furry Wookiees, or would you get one-eyed, one-horned flying
again,
coastal people eaters?
he talked
Yeah.
about creating rest stops along the way as well. So there's a
Isn't that
lot,
interesting?
there's so much more we can move into. I mean, this thing of killing and tit for tat and oh, this is just children. As he said, naughty children on this planet, creating this mayhem when we can have the whole universe opened up to us. I mean, it'll take time, obviously, but this whole new understanding, which is never ending, this is where we need to get fully enamored with this process and moving forward out of the physical state of our understanding.
So, in fact, prior to the recent months, we haven't been afraid to ask these kind of questions, haven't we?
No.
Well,
Well, I'm only speaking for myself.
well, how can you ask if there's a midpoint in your transmutation process if you don't
Oh,
even
okay.
that you can transmute, on Earth?
Well,
Who
didn't he
would I trans?
say the transmutation should only take a fraction of a second? But of course, there's no time in the universe, so maybe it is possible to meet halfway.
Well, I would love to transmute to Brazil. That's a fact. But maybe it can be kind of cool on the way just to have a stop in Honduras. You know,
I mean, it sounds like the Iranians can basically revolutionize the whole travel system on this planet at this point. They just extend the crafts a little bit larger and whatever they need, and we can go from New York to Beijing or vice versa in 5 minutes. As he said, and most of that 5 minutes is the getting up and landing. So I think the new travel in the matter state here on this planet, in a way, is um, there. It's already available. It's just unfortunate that the governments have decided to let us continue to burn fuels and go through all these lines at the airport, and we wouldn't have to do that anymore. We don't need the resources of this planet to do this, but yet we're again being misled by the scientific and the academician community.
and this is what's unfortunate. It doesn't make sense that they put that kind of restriction on when the possibilities are vast and lying there, in front of them. So, it's kind of like you go into a field and you get a field full of gold. And you say, well, I don't want that field. I'm happy with the paper money that I have in my pocket. And it just doesn't make sense. When you're comparing the value of what is there. So why are we clinging, if you will, to physicality?
It's got to be a matter of control. once some of this comes out, I think the population will be, as he said, uncontrollable in a way. Not to the point where they're going to do damages, but control where you can change your map location at your own discretion. You don't have to be subject to any of these things anymore. And so they don't want this to basically the population to be aware. You know, if you're working at making toothpicks in a factory and then you're making X amount per hour and you find out there's another toothpick factory where they're paying double, you'd be going over there. But they're not letting you find that out at this point. It's all been bottled up in so many ways, but this is what the Kesh Foundation is doing step by step, is opening this up. And this is going to be, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. You as the controller of bottling up that process, you are aware, and so it's confounding to understand that if at some point in time you are the controller, but really you're not the controller. What you are is following orders from the controller.
Right.
And at that point, well, you're getting rewarded for following the orders and inflicting the restrictions on the others. But they are that ignorant to not understand that they could also fall victim to that same order. Because someone else could come by and say, well, thank you for your service. I'm really glad that you performed as a ogre, slave master. But, I am now the slave master and you're going to be the slave. So, step down from your position and please enjoy the bondage. And so all of a sudden, you become victim to the whole thing that you've been promoting. And I just don't understand how they can't see that. So this is the anomaly that they are facing, and they, in the process of limiting the awareness of others, they themselves become aware, and so that becomes a natural reaction, and yet they are failing in doing that. You see, the ultimate problem is that regardless of what they do, the truth eventually will come out. So if they hinder the truth today, that will come out tomorrow. The fact that they were the ones complicit in hindering the truth today, that will come out tomorrow.
Right.
So they found out.
No, I was going to say they're probably thinking they can have a breakaway civilization or something where they're going to have the superior things and the rest will have the inferior things. Probably some have even already used some of these craft to travel for meetings, important meetings in a matter of minutes, or, that a normal trip would take 12 or 20 hours or whatever it would be. So they're probably thinking they're clever enough to create some sort of civilization that will have advanced minority to have advanced technology, and the majority continue slopping around in the mire there, so to speak.
Yeah, you gave me a funny vision. Yeah, well, that's.
But it's not going to work. It's a fool's dream.
Well, it's a fool's dream until proven that it's a fool's dream. This is their problem. And so this is the problem. They're only seeing the physicality of the earth and the physicality of man, and they're not seeing the rest. And this was clearly shown on Thursday when we saw the three lights in the sky. And I often wondered, that's a pancake, really. It's a flying pancake. And, how can if you will, a spaceship be a flying pancake? It's not. It has a depth to it. And so if we were to draw this line above the physicality of man, the physicality of Earth, so we can say below the line is the physicality, and below the line are these three lights, and above the line is the plasma reality. And it is above the line that completes the physicality of man and the physicality of Earth. You cannot have one without the other. And if that is the case, then the three lights in the sky cannot be complete without the plasmatic tip of the star formation. That was a brilliant, brilliant revelation in my mind. Over to you, Mark.
Yeah, and I can't blame them because we were all in the same position. I mean, we didn't understand any of the work of the universe, I think, or maybe a little bit of it, but not able to put it together. So we can't blame them, but we can elevate them to change positions. I don't think there'll be any punishment of individuals have done wrong, but to elevate them. We realize that they didn't understand, that's all. And we did the same thing when we didn't understand. We're still doing it. As I say, this is why I think he wants us to get away from this killing, because we have a war going on. We only look at mankind killing one another, but we have a war with the vertical people and the horizontal people going on this planet, unbeknownst to everyone, even within the Keshe Foundation. It's a bit hard to accept that these things are entities, these are souls, and we think it's our right to take as we please. I mean, the Holy Book said God gave man dominion over all of it, but this is not the correct understanding or writing. But so I can't blame them that they're in that position in a way, because they're just not enlightened. So more energy, more enlightenment, touch the amino acids with certain energies. That's why I always thought when Mr. Keshe said about the civilization that just specializes in amino acids. And now we understand a little bit more about amino acids, how the physicality dimension of it and the energy dimension of it. But there's so much more if civilizations are just studying and deep knowledges of amino acids, what potentials can be done with this. It's just, again, beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, so you can imagine the people, investing their life energy in digging through the physicality of Earth. And then when you realize that that is just, one corner of this diagram.
Right, but they don't know another way yet. They can't see it, or they haven't become enlightened to see the bigger picture. So it's good. I mean, it's okay. This is part of our work. And they'll join us in that work, I think, in the future. They're not all going to be commit suicide or anything like that. I think they'll be turned and they'll be a major asset to the foundation in the future.
So that's the prime motivation of my presentation today. So thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, well, we need to understand is that there is so much more, and it's there for us to grab onto it, and by recognizing that there's more, then we start to ask different kinds of questions, and those questions can be, seriously embarrassing. And I think we're all mature to the point now where the ridicule and condemnation as if conspiracy theory or misinformation and all that, well, those are children's games. We're not dealing with child's play here. Adults have entered the building and we're discussing about real facts. Everyone on this planet deserves to know where they came from, how they manifested their physicality, and where they're going, because every person has a soul, and that soul is an extension of the soul of the Creator. And so that becomes the reality.
Right. People feel very important when they're awarded the key to the city of New York or Miami or Chicago. Here, the foundation is offering the key to the universe, not a key to a little speck of dust in some corner of one universe in the matter state. So the whole universe is being opened up to mankind. And it will happen. There's without a doubt the fields, the sun, the systems that are being made, people that will turn at the highest levels of religions and politics. Yes, it'll all shift. And we're seeing this, as Mr. Kesh said, there's a beautiful time. The joyous time is coming or has come. And it's just a matter of getting through this transition period and getting the permanent peace on this planet, of course.
And so, of course, I'm hopeful that this presentation is helpful to both new and mature knowledge seekers and in enabling discussions and bringing forth questions and, of course, a different perspective to understand the depth of the reality of the plasma science. So this is what we need to talk about. So thank you all for allowing me to continue to present.
Right. I thought it was amazing when he said that system was originally made, and we'll play a little bit more of that. We didn't really get into Mr. Kesh's explanation, but that the system was originally made or loaded or constructed to be a strategic defense of the Earth. One meteor, one asteroid hitting the Earth can cause, well, maybe not a meteor, but an asteroid can sure ruin your day or maybe your century or maybe multiple centuries. And so this was something that we had pursued in another organization that I was in, and about talking about the nations working together and collaborating as part of the strategic defense of the Earth. You know, how the dinosaurs were supposedly wiped out or other cataclysms, where these large bodies have hit in the water or on land and just caused a huge. So this is a beautiful, in a way, that it's already been developed, but we want the collaborations of the nations together to form this defense of the Earth. Or if there was a huge energy coming in that would wreak havoc on the weather, how we could create a dome and that it would just sort of roll over it or roll off it or roll away from it. So this is a beautiful point I think we're at, realizing the potential of what's being offered to us.
Certainly the people in Valencia, Spain, could have benefited
Heard
from
about
this
it. Yep.
technology.
I think Erm was telling us she saw some pictures today, and they're saying the UK food supply could be, I think it was mostly fruits and vegetables, but it's still going to impact the supply. But we have a solution for that, don't we, Alex?
Well, yes, but you're an old man, and when you were a young man, you had visions of a bright future for humanity. And I think from your perspective today, you can see a degradation. Despite the technological advances, our
Well,
society is not in as good shape as it was.
maybe we're just more aware of it because of the communication systems and everything else. But this barbarism, this sort of inhumane treatment of one another has been going on for a long, long, long time. Population might have been smaller and so on and so forth, but still, as we heard, Moses killed everything.
Well, that's one
That,
of the questions I
yeah.
wanted to ask you. Like, do you remember the American Civil War?
I wasn't there, but yeah, it was one of our most devastating wars. I think I was just mentioning that to someone earlier today. 600,000 people we lost in that particular conflict. Americans killing Americans.
Yeah.
That was a terrible time. I mean, it's always it doesn't matter if it's here, there, or anywhere. It's still a terrible time for all those involved in it.
Well, as a Canadian, I remember visiting Atlanta or Georgia, areas in Georgia. And because I wasn't American, I could feel in the atmosphere. I could feel the emotion. The emotion of the Civil War was still prevalent in the
Yeah,
society,
yeah.
and
Retribution. Yep. Time for
yeah,
payback. Yep.
and I could see the Georgia Bells, and I could see the chain gangs, and I could see the misery of the poverty. And it was a shocking thing for me because uh, in Canada we only have one um, slum, and that was courtesy of one of the politicians in Canada, former Prime Minister Stanfield, who built a slum in the town of Halifax, the city of Halifax. But I went to see in Georgia, and I seen unbelievable slums, and it was shocking to me. And yet, I can imagine that that shock would kind of be the people there would be immune to that kind of shock. And is there a carry forward since when was the war? It was in 1870. So what would that be? 150, 160 years ago? Does that matter today? Do we conduct ourselves today based on what happened 160 years ago? And even Mr. Kesh mentioned in one of the preambles today, with the telephone, in 1844 and how that's affecting our communication today. And just a funny thought occurred to me, and I noticed it when cell phones became more prevalent. If you were sitting in a restaurant and you and I were having a meal, our discussion would be very low in terms of volume. Hopefully that you and I would discuss things and within earshot. We would make sure that the volume of our discussion was that. And it struck me one day when the phone was ringing, and it was a gentleman's cell phone, and it was loud. So everybody in the restaurant was disturbed by it. And he answers the phone the way he answers the phone at home, loud and proud. Hello, yes, yeah, how you doing? And I'm thinking, here we are all, whispering at our tables, being polite of our neighbors, and here's this clown on a phone, and he's talking as if, he's the most important person in the world, and nobody can listen. And it's obviously a habit, isn't it? That's the way he talks on the phone. But ignorant of the fact that he's in public.
Probably a little touch of the ADHD. Needs a little attention.
Yeah.
We're all starving for more recognition and attention.
Well, I have to look twice now, because there's a lot of people in our area who walk around and talk to themselves, and I often have to, check to see if they're actually carrying a cell phone when they're talking. A lot of them are not. They're just, just talking to themselves.
Mhm.
We have a lot of toxicity, and no, well, it's a mining community, so you can understand that there's a lot of toxicity, and then so they're having mental, complications as a result of that toxicity. But yeah, when people walking down the street and they're just talking away like loud and proud, then they're talking to themselves, and it's part of our society now, and this is how we've adapted. Well, we used to laugh at them. I still laugh at them. I think it's very funny. I just haven't
Right.
grown accustomed to yelling at my cell phone in public.
Yeah, years ago I had that experience where I wasn't really familiar with the phones. I mean, I was, but not all the ear devices and everything. And I did see somebody like that walking down the street, hands up in the air. And then I looked and I could see the wire into the ear, and I said, "Oh, okay, he's on the phone." Okay. So I had that actual experience. It shocked me when I said, "This guy looks crazy the way he's, and then I noticed the little wires into the ear." And I said, "Oh, okay, now I understand."
Well, I assume you have the same laws in the US as we do in Canada, where if you're going to discuss on a cell phone, it has to be hands-free. And I
If
remember,
you're driving.
yeah.
Yeah, this person was walking, I think, when I observed him.
Yeah, but I'm looking at a guy, driving next to me, and he's animated and he's waving his hands in the air and yelling on his cell phone, and he's in the middle of heavy traffic and it's, buddy, put your hands on the steering wheel, and can you focus on the front on the road where you're going? But he was deep in conversation, and I thought, well, I'm pulling out of here. I'm either going to speed up and get away from him, or I'm going to jam on the brakes and let him carry on down the road, and you know, wherever he ends up, I mean, that's his business, but I don't want to be a part of that. And so in that part, I'm kind of grateful. I'm sad that we had to bring that law in, but this is the kind of irresponsibility that people had in their social behavior. So, the laws are there to shall we say, modify social behavior. But as far as I'm concerned, that's etiquette, and etiquette is something that we were taught when we were young. Nobody teaches etiquette now. You look at TikTok and YouTube and stuff like that, and people are glorified for being silly, for being rude, for being, disrespectful. It's a complete change of perspective. So, and for people outside of North America, this is probably a strange conversation. Um, and I'm thinking of Brazil particularly because, when I was really taken aback by the graciousness and politeness of the Brazilian people. And again, of course, we understand we're talking about in generality, but it's a totally different psyche of the society. And well, I'll never forget that class where they had 29 people come to a person's home to learn about plasma science. That would not happen in Canada. Well, it hasn't happened. I've tried.
Oh, it will. It will be happening. There's no question.
Yeah, and then we better get ready. That's true.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting question Mr. Dean asked Mr. Cash about. I thought he said, was there a question you would like us to ask you, or is there a question that you'd like to ask humanity? And he said, I always say my asking is when man will mature. So it's coming. This maturing is in the process of hopefully we're going to get out of the diapers and so on and into, again, what confidence you'll have if you can feed yourself and not to haunt it over anyone. Look how great I am and what I can do, as we saw with the guru, but to share how you can do the same. So this is very beautiful. We're all maturing into this knowledge at just different speeds and different strengths. But I think it's going to be, in a way, sped up the process. Anyone else want to raise a point or ask a question? As I said, Alex, I'd like to continue that for maybe another 8 or 10 minutes about this star formation, because this is an awakening to all of us. I don't think any of us actually saw
Exactly.
it.
So you go do it.
And just to see if there's any more other interactions.